Welcome back to Mr. Speaker Sir, right here on Multicultural Television, MCTV. This morning, our guest is Attorney at Law, Mr. Martin George. Good morning to you, Mr. George, and thank you very much for joining us again on the program, Mr. Speaker Sir.
Yes, hi, good morning to you, and good morning to your viewers all across the diaspora.
Mr. George, you have you have been continuously offering your views on the unwinding of this 2021 debacle that is the Police Service Commission and that surrounds the Police Service Commission. The latest development was that the President nominated a fifth person for the Parliament to approve. And that means that with the 5 people, the PSC would be so duly constituted to proceed. What are some of your thoughts as this country learns of the 5 appointees and the steps forward by the President to the Police Commission?
Okay, all right. So I just want to clarify something. The fact that 5 persons have now been nominated does not mean that 5 persons have been appointed. So this now has to go forward to Parliament. It has to be laid in Parliament. It has to be put on the order paper. And then, of course, it will come up for debate. So the fact that 5 persons have been nominated does not mean that 5, or it does not necessarily mean that any of them will necessarily be appointed. What is required at this stage is for the process to move forward so that you can have that debate take place. Now, the fact of the matter is that it requires just a simple majority in the Parliament. So in other words, whoever controls the majority in the Parliament would most naturally be the side that will prevail in terms of whom they want or don't want as nominees. I don't know what is the government's position as regards any of these nominees, as to whether they are in support of or if they are against. But the fact of the matter is that the consultation process that the Constitution requires is simply that the President must notify both the Prime Minister and the Leader of the Opposition and indicate to them, listen, this person I propose as a nominee for the Police Service Commission, and invite their responses. We need to understand what consultation means from a constitutional standpoint. And the locus classicus in the matter is the case of James Alva Bain versus the Service Commission. In that matter, the courts laid down the test decisively as all the office holder needs to do, in this case the President, she just needs to invite your views, but she doesn't need to take them on board at all. She could take some of what you say. She could take all of what you say. She could ignore you totally once she gives you that opportunity to have a say. So in this context, where we have seen the Leader of the Opposition has apparently not responded to the President at all, the consultation process has in fact been carried out. So even if you refuse to respond, it doesn't matter. The President would have fulfilled her constitutional duty to consult. So it doesn't mean that I have to take your views or your lack of response on board. I have given you the opportunity, and that's all that the Constitution requires. So from here on, it's really for it to go through the Parliament, and then, of course, there will be the debate on the nominees, and both sides will have their say. But at the end of the day, it comes down to a vote, and I guess whoever has the majority of votes in the Parliament would carry the day as to which nominees are chosen and which ones are rejected.
It's interesting, Attorney, that you've defined what a consultation means according to the Constitution. Because in a regular setting, people may believe that consultation is an ongoing conversation. I speak to you.
And that it involves a back and forth, and that, you know, I have to listen to your views and you listen to mine. No, that's interesting. And that's why I wanted to clarify that, because, you see, I wouldn't want members of the public thinking that the President has not carried out her duty constitutionally in this regard. So once she has given that opportunity for a response, that's consultation. And as I say, she could ignore your response, she could take some of it, she could take all, she could just dismiss it. It doesn't matter. she has provided that opportunity for consultation according to what the constitutionally defined definition of consultation is.
How do you deal with the concern that this particular arm of constitution, or this particular thinking of constitution, or style of constitution, as enshrined in the constitution of the country, consultation, sorry, as enshrined in the constitution of the country, really adds to the maximum power of the president of the political directorate and really does not allow for meaningful expression of concern? Is that a valid school of thought in this context?
Well, it may be a valid school of thought from the public perspective. And of course, one can understand, members of the public may say, but that's not really consultation. But that's irrelevant when it comes to the law. Because in law, you have to follow what are the decided cases and authorities and precedents. Those are the things that guide you along with the legislation. And in this case, the legislation is the supreme law, which is the Constitution. So I could understand from a layman's perspective and from the perspective of the man in the street, he may say, but that doesn't seem to make sense. That is not consultation. And I fully agree with him from his perspective. However, from a legal perspective, and that's what we are bound and guided by, ultimately, it satisfies the requirement. Now, on that note, what I'd like to say, Karen, and I think it's important that we make this point. I have repeatedly gone on record in the public space as saying that I am less than happy or less than satisfied with the response which the president gave by way of her newspaper ad from her office seeking to explain and clarify the matters that transpired. I thought there ought to have been more clarity, more decisiveness, and a clear and unequivocal refutation of the claim or the allegation in relation to political interference. And while I understand maybe the sensitivity in terms of the president's office not wanting to name and shame anyone or not wanting to be embroiled or engaged in the political gael, which, as we know in Trinidad and Tobago, could be very violent and vicious. So I could understand that maybe she felt, well, okay, I'm not going to name anybody, but I still think she could have come out with a clearer and more decisive statement to say, for example, while I have served as president, there has been no attempt by anyone at political interference in the Police Service Commission. Or she could have said, in my office, in my presence, there has been no attempt by anyone at political interference in the workings of the Police Service Commission. Or she could say, look, our records show that no one came to the president's house and attempted to interfere or influence the work of the Police Service Commission. You see, I find those clear statements are missing from the explanation proffered by the office of the president. And that's where I would say that, it's less than happy in terms of what she said. I think the nation needed that definitive refutation of those allegations to be able to put the matter to rest. And by not doing so, it added fuel to the fire in the sense that people always speculate about the unknown and what is unclear to them and what they're not sure about. So therefore, it then added impetus to the opposition's motion for, no confidence in the president and the motion to have, to try to trigger the process for the removal of the president. So it added impetus in that sense from the public perspective because people still felt that there were unanswered questions. Now, let's move to the motion of, that the opposition filed seeking to trigger the removal of the president. We must understand that notwithstanding the fact that there are unanswered questions, there's speculation, there's suspicion even, and you may have good grounds for your speculation and your suspicion. But if you do not have the actual evidence, then you must have known that that motion could never succeed. Because first of all, you did not have the votes But even if you didn't have the votes, if you had the actual evidence, then of course, from a moral and social responsibility standpoint, you would have been duty bound to still raise the motion. But the fact of the matter is, the opposition did not have the votes, they did not have the evidence, and they still went ahead with it. And then they sought in a way to now, sully and, tarnish the image of the office of the president even more than what has appeared to occur in the last, few weeks or months. So therefore, that's where I part ways with the action of the opposition, in the sense that if it is that you really had some tangible evidence, then of course, as I say, you would still have a moral duty, even though you know you didn't have the votes. But you cannot base it on a suspicion or speculation when you are actually lacking evidence. The opposition bench is filled with attorneys. They all know that it's not a matter of what has happened, it's a matter of what you can prove. We all know that those are the fundamentals of law, right? And remember, the parliament is one of the highest courts in the land. So therefore, in those circumstances, if you knew you actually didn't have the evidence, I just felt it unfortunate, and it did not seem to be an appropriate use of that constitutional provision to seek to trigger the removal of the president just based on what really amounted to a suspicion and allegations and basically rumors. So that's where I always try to be very balanced in everything I say and in all my discourses to the public, because, I think that we always tend to get very one-sided and myopic views from many of the, commentators in the public space who are, pushing one agenda or another, or who see things through, tinted rose-colored glasses of, different shades of red or yellow. And, we need to move away from the hubris and the political bacchanal and just try to see the issues as they are and try to think of Trinidad and Tobago first and understand that, look, hey, removal of a president is a very serious thing. And if we are going to embark upon that, let's be serious about it if we have the evidence. If we don't have the evidence, then we can say, well, look, we are not happy with her explanation, the same way that I have said all the time, but you don't seek to invoke what is such a serious provision in the Constitution. If one goes back all the way to the Hugh Woodin Commission, Constitutional Commission, where they were, part of the drafters and framers of our present Constitution, when they spoke about this particular section, right, Section 36 and going all the way down to Section 38 of the Constitution, they said, listen, we don't intend or expect that this will be used at all. However, just in case you have a sufficiently serious allegation backed by the evidence, we are putting it in there. And that's my point. You did not have the actual evidence. And the lack of explanation by the president's house is not evidence. In other words, that's not the evidence that you needed for that motion. The speculation, the rumor, the suspicion, that's not evidence. And we must know the difference. And I think that there are many, members of the opposition who are intelligent enough to have known the difference. And that's why I felt a sense of disappointment in the way they approached this, and even more so in the way they attempted to conduct the people's business in the parliament.
It's interesting that you're raising these issues, Attorney George. You're making the distinction about a lack of a statement and the speculation that a lack of a statement will bring, and the concerns, of course, that a lack of a statement will prompt, with the need to have evidence to inform the motion. There are some people who are of the view that the motion would have been justified with evidence, and by evidence we mean a log of the visitor's book at the president's house, or a video of the president meeting with someone, something that is tangible that can show a connection. But there are those who are of the view that even without having something tangible, the motion ought to have been raised because of the concerns that were now taking place. As a matter of fact, the opposition, while not having the majority of seats in Parliament, and while not having the majority of seats in the Electoral College, considered it a great victory to them that they were still able to raise the matters within the context of the motion. How do you respond to that view that the concerns or the level of concerns was justification enough to have the motion moved?
Right. You see, so it really is a Pyrrhic victory and a hollow win, if that's what it's considered as, because you did not succeed, first of all, and then, the entire, shambolic proceedings that, transpired in the House. I don't think there's any right-thinking member of our population who can feel proud of the behavior that was displayed in the Parliament. Maybe on both sides, if you understand me, all right? Because I'm always very balanced. So the fact of the matter is, you ask yourself, what did it achieve except maybe for political gamesmanship and, political grandstanding, which you could have done even without bringing that motion? You see, Karen, I'll tell you something. We have to be careful in Trinidad and Tobago that while we may attack, criticize, and chastise the behavior of individuals and office holders, we have to be careful that we don't try to destroy or pull down the actual office in the process. So in other words, we have to make that distinction. And it appears that that is difficult for many of our politicians on both sides to make that distinction. So you may criticize or chastise the behavior of an individual or an office holder, but still show the respect for the office. And it seems that some persons have that difficulty. And that's where I would always say, as we develop and try to, bring our democracy up to the level where, we can feel proud to say, well, we are a first world civilized nation, then we have to be careful not to pull down our very institutions in the process of, criticizing or chastising the behaviors of individuals. And that's where I think that, we have to think nation building, we have to think, the broader picture, rather than the narrow political win that you just described.
One of the points you raised before, Attorney George, was the question of the statement by the President. There are a number of persons who have expressed the same view that you have expressed. Attorney Martin George has expressed a view. Over the weekend, you saw where Dr. Wayne Kubla Singh wrote to the President, again asking for a clearer statement. We've also heard statements from the Prime Minister on this matter. What are your views on the statements offered by the Prime Minister with respect to any potential meeting he might have had with Her Excellency?
Well, sometimes I like to use the expression, sometimes one is never so eloquent as when one is silent. And it's my respectful view that in this circumstance, maybe the Prime Minister should have remained silent, because the explanation and the discourse that I heard from him, particularly, I think, at a political meeting in Belmont that was had, it raised more questions than answers in my mind. So I was not happy with his explanation either. And his explanation seemed to actually, fuel even greater speculation. So, as I say, sometimes, if one were to remain silent, you speak with more eloquence and, more effectiveness than when you open your mouth and you actually raise more questions than answers.
Certainly one for the books. One is maybe more eloquent when one is silent. I will definitely keep that one for my own reference, Attorney George. Let's take some messages at this point in time, because when we get back, there are a couple more questions we would want to pose on this entire ongoing fiasco with respect to the Police Service Commission and their next steps forward. You are viewing, Mr. Speaker, sir, right here on MCTV. Stay with us.
sport is in trouble. What can be done to save sports in TNT? Join host Gordon Pear on Sports Insight every Monday and Wednesday on MCTV from 4:30 p.m. as he identifies the problems, look for solutions, and points the way forward. Sports Insight, where we talk to the coaches, athletes, administrators, and of course, you, the fans, as we bring positive change through sport.
You did the right thing. So now we're giving you things. Republic Bank thanks you and wants to reward you for getting vaxxed. Win $5,000 in prizes every week, plus one of 2 cars in December. You took care of your health, and now we're taking care of you. $5,000 and a chance to win a car. See press and log on to republictt.com for details.
Join me, Dr. Shivan Mahabir, on The Present Mind, where we look at common mental illnesses and help you to live a happier, healthier life. We are on MCTV, Tuesdays 1:30 p.m. and Thursdays 1:30 p.m. See you then.
Welcome back to Mr. Speaker. So right here on Multicultural Television, MCTV, our guest this morning, Attorney at Law Martin George, who is also a former member of the Police Service Commission, and we've been discussing the range of latest issues in this ongoing unwinding fiasco surrounding the PSC. Attorney, we've spoken about the President, you've given your views about the statement, you've spoken about the Prime Minister's eloquence being greater had he remained silent. But one of the conversations emerging, or that did emerge, was that of the Speaker of the House, and how the Speaker of the House would have conducted the operations on that day when the motion was in fact laid. The opposition UNC describing the Speaker's views as the Speaker's approach as unconstitutional. You've had several other persons, including former Attorney General Ramesh Maharaj, saying that the Speaker was well within her right and well, according to the Constitution, to have conducted the proceedings in the manner in which they were. What are your views?
Even before Senior Counsel Maharaj espoused his views publicly, I have been on record as saying that the procedure which was laid out by the Speaker and telegraphed by her in advance is the correct procedure according to the Constitution, and that's what we have to be guided by. We can't be guided by emotions and passions and, the rabble-rousers. We have to be guided by law and order, due process, and due respect for our constitutionally enshrined provisions. And the Constitution is pellucid on the matter. There's no room for even any doubt or any other interpretation. If we as a nation feel that, well, the Constitution is not serving our needs in that regard, then of course what we need to do is engage in constitutional reform. But you don't go to the Parliament and then, you start, carrying on in a manner that is totally inimical to the interests of good governance or good behavior. And then you say, well, look, the Speaker has acted in an authoritarian manner, when in fact all she's doing is simply following the provisions of the Constitution. And she herself displayed great restraint during the proceedings, in the way that she was interrupted several times. And, I tell you, for our children, that's never a good example for them to see of the behavior of any adults. And that's where I call out the opposition on that. I think that it was an awful and shameful display. You do not behave like that in the Parliament, because then what's going to be next? What are they going to physically start fighting or throwing chairs? If you understand me, come on. Our school children look up to you guys as the leaders, the exemplars. So of course you could disagree, but we must learn in Trinidad and Tobago, and this is another quote to Karen that I would want us to, bear in mind. We must learn to disagree.
I'm taking notes.
Yes, we must learn to disagree without being disagreeable. And it seems that we can't do that in the politics of Trinidad and Tobago. You know, it appears that one side can't disagree with the other without the name calling, the mudslinging, and, you know, the Movilang and the Bacchanal. Come on, please, people. There are enough persons in the population who are intelligent enough to see through that and to wonder, is this what we really want for Trinidad and Tobago? And that's where I think that, you know, it really is not acceptable behavior at any level to carry on like that in the Parliament.
How do you respond to the view, Attorney George, as was expressed by the opposition and one or two other commentators, that, number one, the historic nature of the moment required a motion, and number two, that motions are allowed for other required a debate, and number two, debates are allowed for other motions, and that there ought to have been a debate on this occasion? Do you believe that the emotive type of conversation is sufficient to justify the having a debate?
Well, just the fact that it's an emotive type of conversation, I think that in itself answers the question, because we cannot be guided by our emotions in a matter such as this. We have to be guided by the Constitution. You are talking about one of the most serious provisions in the Constitution, and therefore we need to approach it seriously. We can't approach it based on emotion. You know, I've always said, and this is a saying I have, you know, shared with my friends, my family, and those close to me. I say, you must never let desperation be the source of either your thoughts, your words, or your actions. So no matter how desperate you were to make that point, you don't act in a desperate manner. And that's what appeared to be showing through fully in what transpired in the Parliament. It was an act of desperation, and you know, you ended up basically debasing yourselves, debasing the Parliament in your frustration. So that's where emotion comes in, and that's why I tell you, emotion really has no place in any such debate.
One of the big questions about this PSC matter is that now that we have had 5 nominees, not 5 confirmed persons, confirmed commissioners, but 5 nominees, and now that the Parliament will debate these nominees, what is going to happen, Attorney, if the Parliament debunks one of the nominees? Does it scratch the entire process? Does it mean that another nominee ought to be sourced? Or does it simply mean that if the administration of the day, because it has the majority of persons through simple majority, can simply approve whom they like?
Yes, that's it. In a nutshell, whoever has the majority gets to choose whoever they want for the Police Service Commission. And remember, even though the prime ministerial veto has been removed in terms of the choice of who ultimately becomes Commissioner of Police, what you essentially have replaced it with is a parliamentary veto, whereby whoever controls the majority in the House of Representatives would be the side that would be able to choose who they want as Commissioner of Police. That's the bottom line. So in other words, if you recall, in the last iteration of this process, where you had names being put forth to the Parliament, if you recall, the government of the day, they rejected the first 3 nominees until they came down to Gary Griffith, whom they wanted. So he was not the number 1 choice on the list. He was not the number 2 choice. He was not the number 3 choice. So the first name was submitted to the Parliament for choice of commissioner. The government rejected that because they had the majority vote. And it's a simple majority that's required. The second name was sent. The government rejected that also, because they also had the majority vote. The third name was sent, the government rejected that also. And then when the 4th name came up, whom they wanted, they approved that. And that's the reality. So, you know, the fact of the matter is, having replaced the prime ministerial veto with what is essentially a parliamentary veto, then whoever is the prime minister and is, you know, in charge of his troops in Parliament basically he still gets his way and his say as to who becomes commissioner of police or who doesn't become commissioner of police.
What do you think the work of the PSC will now look like, or will now appear, once the 5 of them are constituted? Is it that they must start a merit list from scratch with these new commissioners approving whom is on the merit list at the process, or is it that the merit list as was proposed by the previous commission comes forward? What is the situation there?
Well, I think it's a matter for them to decide how they wish to meet and treat with it. I mean, I wouldn't want to preempt their work. I mean, they're not even constituted yet. So, you know, I wouldn't want to say anything to prejudge or prejudice the situation. But I can tell you that it's a minefield laying ahead of them, you know, and I mean, I must salute indeed the 5 brave souls who have volunteered for this rather onerous task, which is going to be, I mean, under so much public scrutiny that they would be under the microscope all the time. And this way forward is going to be littered with litigation one way or the other by persons who will feel disgruntled either, you know, by if you do this action, some people will be happy, some will be upset, you will end up with some litigation. You choose the other choice and you will equally have some who will be happy, some who will be upset. So there's no easy end to this. And I can tell you, this movie is going to be replaying like a never-ending story for months to come in Trinidad and Tobago. All right, Karen, I must, however, ask if I can be excused at this point because I do have some obligations in court. It's been a pleasure chatting with you and being on your show. I know you have other topics that you wanted to discuss with your viewers. So if it would be a convenient time, I would certainly like to beg my exit.
Certainly excused, Attorney George, and we want to thank you for sparing us that time this morning. Notwithstanding your several other commitments, we were able to gain a range of insights. Number one, Attorney George stating that 5 persons nominated does not mean that 5 persons will be appointed. Also saying that the process requires a simple majority, that the President has carried out her duty to consult according to the Constitution, and that he is less than satisfied by the response offered by the President on the matters pertaining to the merit list. The statement by the President, according to Attorney George, needs to be clearer and decisive, and that the opposition ought to have had evidence ahead of the motion that was moved to impeach the President. And, of course, making a point that maybe the Prime Minister's veto power ought to have been replaced by a parliamentary veto power as it pertains.
No, it was replaced by a parliamentary veto power, which I'm saying it's amongst almost the same thing.
Indeed. And Attorney George, we want to thank you very much for your time this morning. And of course, we will look forward to our next conversation with you.
Indeed. It's a pleasure, and thank you, and have a great morning, you and your viewers.
Thank you very much.